The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness of Bagram Airfield like a blade. Major Kestrel Hawkeye Vance was halfway through her third cup of coffee when the emergency frequency lit up with a transmission that would change everything. Mayday, Mayday, this is Neptune 6 Actual. We are compromised. I repeat, we are compromised. The voice was steady despite the gunfire crackling in the background, professional even as death closed in around the speaker. Hawkeye set down her mug with deliberate precision, her weathered hands already reaching for her flight helmet. At 34, she had logged more combat hours in the A-10 Thunderbolt II than most pilots saw in their entire careers. Her aircraft, tail number 80248, bore the scars of 17 deployments and 43 confirmed enemy kills. The maintenance crews called her bird the Reaper's chariot, though never to her face. They respected the plane. The pilot was another matter entirely. Neptune 6 Actual, this is AWACS Overlord. Authenticate your position, came the response from the Airborne Command Center circling high above the Hindu Kush Mountains. But Hawkeye was already moving, her flight suit zipping up with practiced efficiency. She knew that call sign. Neptune 6 belonged to SEAL Team 7, currently operating deep behind enemy lines in the Kunar province. The mission was classified above her clearance level, but that didn't matter now. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as intelligence officers scrambled to locate the compromised unit. On the massive tactical display, a red icon pulsed ominously in a valley where no American forces were supposed to be. The terrain was a death trap, sheer cliff walls on three sides, with only one narrow exit that was certainly under enemy observation by now. "Sir, we have two F-22 Raptors 15 minutes out," reported Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Dane, the wing operations officer. His voice carried the confidence of a man who had never doubted air superiority. "They can provide immediate air support until we get a proper rescue package assembled." But General Patricia Holloway, the base commander, was studying satellite imagery with the intensity of a chess master examining an endgame. The valley was designated as a no-fly zone due to suspected surface-to-air missile sites. Sending in fifth-generation fighters would be like using a scalpel to perform surgery in a minefield. "Negative," she said quietly. "Recall the Raptors. We need a different approach." Hawkeye paused at the operations center entrance, reading the tactical situation with eyes that had seen too many good soldiers die. The SEALs were trapped in what the intelligence community euphemistically called a target-rich environment. They needed close air support, and they needed it now. But the mission profile required something the sleek, supersonic fighters couldn't provide: the ability to loiter low and slow, to distinguish friend from foe in the chaos of ground combat, and to deliver precision firepower within danger-close distances of friendly forces. She stepped forward into the fluorescent-lit war room, knowing that what she was about to propose would either save lives or end her career. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats before Hawkeye cleared her throat. "General, request permission to speak freely." Her voice cut through the tactical chatter with the authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard, even if others didn't want to listen. General Holloway looked up from the satellite feed, her steel-gray eyes assessing the pilot who had just inserted herself into a conversation between field-grade officers. "Go ahead, Major," Holloway said, though her tone suggested this better be important. "Ma'am, with respect, the Raptors can't help those SEALs. That valley is a nightmare for fast movers, too narrow, too many blind spots, and those SAM sites will light up anything flying above 1,500 feet. Hawkeye stepped closer to the display, pointing to the terrain features with the precision of someone who had studied every inch of Afghan airspace. "But an A-10 can get in there. Low altitude, tight turns, maximum loiter time. The Warthog was built for this exact scenario." Lieutenant Colonel Dane scoffed, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Major, that area is designated red. We've got confirmed SA-11 and SA-15 systems in adjacent valleys. Your aircraft would be a sitting duck." His dismissal was casual, automatic. the kind of professional disregard that Hawkeye had encountered throughout her career. To him, she was just another pilot with more enthusiasm than sense. "Sir, with respect, the A-10 has survived worse." Hawkeye's response was measured, factual. She had flown through the mother of all anti-aircraft environments during Operation Inherent Resolve, when ISIS fighters had turned every building in Mosul into a potential missile launch site. And right now, those SEALs don't have the luxury of waiting for a safer option. The radio crackled again, cutting through the debate with brutal clarity. "Overlord, this is Neptune 6 actual. We have 4 wounded, running low on ammunition. Enemy is massing for final assault. Request immediate close air support, any platform available. We cannot hold this position much longer." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake Reeves, a SEAL with 2 silver stars and a reputation for understatement. If he was calling for help, the situation was beyond desperate. General Holloway felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Every decision in this room would echo through Pentagon briefings and congressional hearings, but more importantly, it would determine whether 12 American warriors made it home alive. "Major Vance," the general said slowly, "what's your honest assessment of mission survivability?" Hawkeye met her commander's gaze without flinching. "Ma'am, it's not about survivability. It's about what's right. Those men are counting on us to bring them home, and an A-10 is the only platform that can deliver accurate fires in that terrain without risking collateral damage to friendlies." The operations center had fallen silent except for the hum of electronics and the distant sound of aircraft engines spinning up on the flight line. Everyone present understood the magnitude of the moment, a career-defining decision that would be dissected for years to come, regardless of the outcome. The weight of 12 lives pressed against the silence like a physical force. General Holloway stared at the tactical display, where the red icon representing Neptune 6 pulsed with mechanical persistence. Intelligence reports indicated the Taliban forces surrounding the SEALs numbered at least 60 fighters, with more converging on the position. The terrain offered no escape routes, no extraction zones, no miraculous alternatives to close air support. "The political ramifications alone," Lieutenant Colonel Dane began, but Holloway cut him off with a gesture. "Major Vance, what's your flight status?" the general asked. "Aircraft is fully mission-capable, ma'am. Full load of 30mm AGM-65 Mavericks and cluster munitions. Fuel for 4 hours on station." Hawkeye rattled off the specifications with clinical precision, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She had flown 127 combat sorties, but never one where the stakes felt this personal, this immediate. "And your crew chief's assessment?" "Staff Sergeant Kowalski signed off on the bird 20 minutes ago. She's ready to fight." Hawkeye allowed herself a slight smile at the memory of her crew chief's gruff professionalism. Technical Sergeant Maria Kowalski treated the A-10 like her own child, and her maintenance standards were legendary throughout the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing. The radio erupted with gunfire and shouted commands. "Overlord taking heavy fire from the North Ridge. We've got RPGs impacting, multiple casualties. How copy?" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static and the terrible imagination of what was happening in that distant valley. General Holloway closed her eyes for a moment, consulting the mental calculus that separated commanders from mere officers. The safe play was to wait for a full rescue package, helicopters, additional air support, maybe even a larger ground element. But safe plays didn't always save lives, and those SEALs were dying while she calculated risk-to-benefit ratios. "Major, you're authorized for immediate launch. Call sign will be Hawkeye 11. Your mission is close air support and combat search and rescue as required." The general's voice carried the finality of a combat order, but also something else, a thread of respect that hadn't been there before. "God help us all." Hawkeye snapped to attention, her salute crisp despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Ma'am, understood." Hawkeye 1-1, immediate launch for close air support. She turned toward the exit, her flight boots echoing against the concrete floor with purposeful strides. Major General Holloway called after her, "Bring them home." "Roger that, ma'am, all of them." The night air hit Hawkeye's face like a slap as she emerged from the operations center, her breath forming clouds in the thin mountain atmosphere. Bagram's flight line stretched before her, illuminated by harsh sodium lights that turned everything the color of old brass. Her A-10 sat in its revetment like a sleeping predator, its twin engines and distinctive straight wings giving it the appearance of something built for war rather than grace. Staff Sergeant Kowalski was waiting beside the aircraft, her flight line uniform immaculate despite having worked through the night. "Major, she's ready to go hunting," the crew chief announced, patting the aircraft's armored nose with obvious affection. "Full combat load, all systems green. I personally inspected every round of 30 mil. "Outstanding, Sergeant. What's your gut feeling about the bird tonight?" It was a ritual question, one that acknowledged the almost mystical bond between maintainers and their aircraft. Crew chiefs could sense problems that computers missed, intuitions born from thousands of hours spent with hands deep in the mechanical guts of these machines. "She's angry, ma'am, wants to fight." Kowalski's grin was fierce in the artificial light. "Fair warning, I loaded her heavy on the armor-piercing incendiaries. Figured you might need the extra punch." Hawkeye nodded, accepting the crew chief's professional judgment. She began her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, checking control surfaces, weapons pylons, and the massive GAU-8 cannon that formed the aircraft's backbone. The Avenger rotary cannon could fire 30mm depleted uranium rounds at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute, enough firepower to shred main battle tanks, let alone the technicals and fortified positions she expected to encounter. The cockpit wrapped around her like a familiar embrace, every switch and display positioned exactly where muscle memory expected them. She ran through the startup checklist with automatic efficiency, while her mind was already flying the mission, visualizing approach angles and target priorities. The twin General Electric engines wound up with their characteristic whine, building toward the distinctive sound that had earned the A-10 its Warthog nickname. Bagram Tower, Hawkeye 1-1 ready for immediate departure. Hawkeye 1-1, you're cleared for takeoff, runway 21. Wind is calm, altimeter 29er rate 7. Be advised, you're cleared direct to the Kunar province, flight level 150 initially. Roger Bagram, Hawkeye 1-1 rolling. The accelerated down the runway with deceptive speed, its powerful engines pushing the heavily loaded aircraft into the star-filled sky. As the landing gear retracted with mechanical precision, Hawkeye felt the familiar transformation, the marriage of pilot and machine that turned her from a person into a weapons system. Below, the lights of Bagram grew smaller, while ahead lay the darkness of the Hindu Kush and 12 American warriors fighting for their lives. The flight to the Kunar province took 37 minutes at maximum cruise speed, every second stretching like an hour as Hawkeye monitored the emergency frequency. The SEALs had gone silent, which could mean many things, none of them good. Either their radio was damaged, their position overrun, or they were conserving battery power for a final transmission. Each possibility carried its own particular flavor of dread. AWACS Overlord, this is Hawkeye 1-1, checking in at flight level 150, requesting tactical picture. Her voice was steady over the encrypted channel, professional despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. In the distance, the mountains rose like broken teeth against the star field, their peaks catching the first hint of dawn. Hawkeye 1-1, Overlord. We have you on scope. Threat picture shows possible SAM activity in grid squares 41 SMD 234 567 and 41 SMD 298 432. Neptune 6's last known position is 41 SMD 267 445. No contact for 14 minutes. 14 minutes. In infantry combat, that was a lifetime. Hawkeye checked her weapon systems one final time, watching as the heads-up display confirmed full ordnance load and all systems operational. The GAU-8 showed 1,174 rounds of 30mm ammunition, enough to level a city block if necessary. The AGM-65 Maverick missiles hung beneath her wings like technological talons, each one capable of precision strikes at standoff ranges. Overlord, what's the rules of engagement? Hawkeye 1-1, row is weapons-free in designated target area. Danger close is authorized for friendly forces. Confirm you understand, danger close authorized. The transmission sent a chill through the cockpit. Danger close meant delivering ordnance within the minimum safe distance of friendly troops, a practice reserved for the most desperate circumstances. It required absolute precision, complete trust in the aircraft's targeting systems, and nerves that could thread needles while under fire. It also meant the SEAL's situation was even worse than she had imagined. Overlord, copy danger close authorized. Hawkeye 1-1 descending to tactical altitude. She pushed the stick forward, feeling the aircraft respond with eager compliance. The altimeter unwound as she descended toward the deck, trading the safety of altitude for the tactical advantage of surprise. At 500 feet above ground level, she was below most radar horizons but well within the engagement envelope of small arms and portable missiles. It was a calculated gamble, the kind that separated close air support pilots from everyone else. The valley appeared ahead like a wound in the earth, its walls steep and forbidding in the gray pre-dawn light. Somewhere in that maze of rock and shadow, 12 American warriors were making their last stand. The valley stretched before Hawkeye like a geological amphitheater designed by some malevolent architect, its walls rising nearly vertical from a narrow floor carpeted with boulders and scrub vegetation. Her targeting pod painted the terrain in eerie green and white, the thermal imagery revealing heat signatures that could be vehicles, weapons, or human bodies. She banked left, following the valley's contours while scanning for any sign of the missing SEALs. Neptune 6, this is Hawkeye 1-1 on station with full combat load. How copy? She transmitted on the emergency frequency, her voice cutting through the static with professional calm. Nothing. The silence stretched for 15 seconds before she tried again. Any Neptune station, Hawkeye 1-1 is overhead with close air support. Acknowledge if able. The response came as a whisper, barely audible above the background hiss of radio interference. Hawkeye 1-1, Neptune 6 actual. Thank God you're here. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Reeves, though it sounded older, more strained than the confident SEAL leader she had met during joint training exercises. We're in a world of hurt down here. Neptune 6, I have you on thermal. What's your tactical situation? We've got enemy positions on the north and east ridges, approximately 60 to 80 fighters. They've been pounding us with RPGs and heavy machine guns for the past hour. I've got 2 KIA, 4 wounded, and we're down to our last magazines. The transmission was interrupted by the sharp crack of rifle fire and the deeper boom of an explosion. They're massing for a final assault. We need immediate fire support on the ridgelines. Hawkeye adjusted her sensor suite, switching to high-resolution mode as she identified the threat positions. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ground well, occupying commanding positions that offered both cover and interlocking fields of fire. Dislodging them would require precise application of violence, delivered with surgical accuracy to avoid hitting the surrounded SEALs. Neptune 6, I'm painting targets now. Stand by for immediate fire support. She designated the first target, a heavy machine gun position carved into the north ridge, and felt the familiar vibration as the GAU-8 cannon oriented toward the target. Guns hot, 30 seconds to impact. Keep your heads down. The A-10 banked into its attack run, the aircraft systems automatically calculating ballistics while Hawkeye lined up the shot with practiced precision. The ridge filled her windscreen as she dove toward the enemy position, the aircraft's armored titanium bathtub protecting her from the small arms fire that was now rising to meet her approach. At 1,200 meters range, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 erupted with its distinctive sound, a mechanical growl that had earned it the nickname, the sound of freedom, among ground troops. 30-millimeter rounds streamed toward the target at nearly the speed of sound, each depleted uranium projectile carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through tank armor. The enemy machine gun position simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a cloud of rock dust and high explosive. But there were dozens more targets, and the Taliban fighters were now fully alert to her presence. Tracer rounds began rising from multiple positions like lethal fireworks, creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Hawkeye pulled hard left, using the valley walls to break visual contact while she set up for her next attack run. The aircraft groaned under the G-forces, but responded with the reliable precision that had made the A-10 legendary among close air support pilots. She was completely in her element now, the fusion of pilot and machine that transformed her into something more than human, a guardian angel with titanium wings and a cannon for a voice. Neptune 6, direct hit on target 1. I'm repositioning for follow-up strikes. Mark your positions with infrared strobes if you have them. Roger Hawkeye, strobes are out, and thanks, that machine gun was about to overrun our position. The thermal imaging revealed the IR strobes as pulsing white dots in the sea of background heat, clearly marking the SEAL's defensive perimeter. They had formed a tight circle in a depression near the valley floor, using the natural terrain and whatever cover they could find to create interlocking fields of fire. It was a textbook defensive position, though one that would inevitably be overwhelmed by superior numbers without continued air support. Hawkeye identified her next target, a cluster of fighters occupying a cave complex on the east ridge. The position was partially concealed, but the thermal signatures of muzzle flashes gave away their location. She armed an AGM-65 Maverick, its infrared seeker head automatically locking onto the highest heat signature in the target area. Neptune 6 Maverick inbound 15 seconds, fire in the hole. The missile streaked away from the aircraft's wing pylon, leaving a trail of white smoke as it guided itself toward the target with autonomous precision. The explosion lit up the valley like a miniature sunrise, the cave mouth disappearing in a cascade of falling rock. Secondary explosions suggested the position had been storing ammunition, turning what should have been a tactical victory into a spectacular display of destructive force. But the Taliban weren't giving up. If anything, the air strikes seemed to galvanize them, and Hawkeye could see movement throughout the valley as reinforcements moved toward the surrounded SEALs. Time was running out, and she had enough ordnance for perhaps 6 more attack runs before she would need to return to base for rearming. Neptune 6, what's your ammunition status? We're down to emergency reserves. Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire if they rush us all at once. 10 minutes. Hawkeye felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with impossible mathematics. She could suppress the enemy positions, but she couldn't eliminate them all before her ammunition ran out. And once she left the area, the Taliban would finish what they had started. Unless... Neptune 6, I'm going to need you to trust me on this one. Can you move your position on my command? The radio crackled with static before Reeves responded. Hawkeye, we've got wounded. Moving under fire is going to be difficult. I understand, but I've got an idea that might get you all out of this valley alive. The plan forming in Hawkeye's mind was audacious, dangerous, and probably violated several regulations regarding the tactical employment of close air support aircraft. But it was also the only option that offered hope for all 12 SEALs to make it home. She began climbing to gain altitude for what she knew would be either the most brilliant or the most disastrous maneuver of her career. At 3,000 feet above ground level, Hawkeye could see the entire tactical picture spread below her like a three-dimensional chessboard. The Taliban positions formed a rough horseshoe around the trapped SEALs, with the heaviest concentration of fighters occupying the high ground on the north and east ridges. The south face of the valley offered the only potential escape route, but it was a narrow defile that could easily become a killing ground if the enemy repositioned quickly enough. AWACS Overlord, this is Hawkeye 1-1. I need an immediate weather update for this area, specifically wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes. The request sounded routine, but Hawkeye's plan depended on atmospheric conditions that changed by the minute in the mountains. Hawkeye 1-1, current winds are from the northwest at 12 knots at your altitude, increasing to 18 knots at 5,000 feet. Visibility unlimited, temperature -2 Celsius. Perfect. The wind direction would work in her favor, carrying her ordnance effects exactly where she needed them. She armed her remaining cluster munitions, 2 CBU A-10 combined effects munitions that would scatter hundreds of submunitions across a wide area. Individually, the bomblets were devastating against personnel and light vehicles. Collectively, they could transform an entire ridgeline into a zone of lethal fragmentation. Neptune 6, in approximately 30 seconds, I'm going to lay down a heavy suppression pattern across both ridges. When I give you the word, you move south as fast as you can carry your wounded. Don't stop, don't look back, don't engage targets unless you absolutely have to. I'll be right behind you. Roger Hawkeye, will be ready. She rolled inverted and pulled the stick back, diving toward the valley in a near-vertical attack run that would have been suicidal in any aircraft except the A-10. The altimeter unwound with frightening speed as the rocky walls rushed up to meet her, but she held the dive until the last possible moment before releasing both cluster munitions in a perfectly timed sequence. The CBU-87s detonated at preset altitudes, each warhead transforming into a cloud of 202 submunitions that carpeted the enemy positions with overlapping explosions. The effect was immediate and devastating. Dozens of Taliban fighters were caught in the open as the bomblets rained down like mechanical hail. The lucky ones died instantly. The others screamed. Neptune 6, execute, execute, execute. Hawkeye transmitted while pulling out of her dive with enough G-force to gray out her vision. When her sight cleared, she could see 12 figures moving across the valley floor in tactical formation, carrying their wounded with the fluid precision of warriors who had trained together for years. But the Taliban weren't finished. The survivors were regrouping, and some were already moving to cut off the SEALs' escape route. Hawkeye rolled hard right and dove again, this time with the GAU-8 cannon ready to deliver precision fire against individual targets. The first Taliban fighter fell to a 3-round burst that removed him from existence. The second managed to get off a single AK-47 round before 30mm depleted uranium turned him into mist. Hawkeye were taking fire from the South Ridge, Reeves called over the radio, his voice strained from carrying a wounded teammate. Can you suppress that position? She could see the muzzle flashes, 3 fighters with automatic weapons positioned behind a rocky outcrop that commanded the escape route. They were too close to the SEALs for cluster munitions, too well protected for cannon fire. But she had 1 Maverick missile remaining, and the infrared seeker was already painting the largest heat signature. The missile streaked down from her aircraft like a mechanical thunderbolt, guided by its own internal logic toward the enemy position. The explosion shattered the rocky outcrop and sent avalanches cascading down the valley walls, but more importantly, it eliminated the immediate threat to the escaping SEALs. Neptune 6, you're clear to the south. I'm going to orbit overhead and make sure nobody follows you. Hawkeye 1-1, this is Neptune 6 actual. We're clear of the valley and moving toward the extraction point. I don't know how to thank you. Just get your people home, Commander. That's thanks enough. But even as she spoke, Hawkeye knew the mission wasn't over. Her fuel was running low, her ammunition nearly exhausted, and there were still enemy forces scattered throughout the area. The SEALs had escaped the immediate trap, but they still needed cover until a rescue helicopter could reach them. She checked her fuel gauges and made the calculation that every combat pilot eventually faces: how much risk to accept in service of others. The answer, as always, was whatever it took. The extraction zone lay 8 kilometers south of the valley, a relatively flat area of rocky terrain that could accommodate a helicopter landing. Hawkeye established a defensive orbit overhead, her sensors scanning for any signs of enemy movement toward the SEAL's position. The pre-dawn darkness was giving way to the gray half-light of early morning, reducing her thermal imaging advantage but improving visual navigation. AWACS Overlord, this is Hawkeye 1-1. Request immediate medical evacuation for Neptune 6. 2. Urgent surgical. 4. Priority wounded. 6. Ambulatory. The clinical terminology couldn't capture the reality of what those 12 warriors had endured, but it would ensure the right resources were dispatched to save lives. Hawkeye 1-1 Overlord. Dustoff is airborne. ETA your position 20 minutes. Be advised, we're showing multiple enemy vehicles converging on your area from the north and east. The threat board was lighting up with new contacts, at least 6 vehicles moving at high speed along the mountain roads toward the extraction point. If they reached the area before the rescue helicopter, the SEALs would be trapped again, this time with no ammunition and multiple casualties, requiring immediate medical attention. Neptune 6, this is Hawkeye. You've got company coming from 2 directions. I'm going to try to delay them, but you need to be ready to move if necessary. Roger Hawkeye. We're establishing a defensive perimeter, but we're running on empty down here. Hawkeye pushed her throttles forward, climbing toward the mountain roads where the enemy vehicles were racing to intercept the rescue operation. Her cannon ammunition was down to fewer than 200 rounds, but that would have to be enough. The first target was a technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, leading a convoy of 4 other vehicles through a narrow canyon. The attack run had to be perfect. She dove toward the road, using the canyon walls to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The technical's crew never saw her coming. At 800 meters range, she opened fire with a sustained burst that turned the vehicle into burning wreckage and blocked the road for the following vehicles. The remaining trucks scattered, their crews abandoning the vehicles and taking cover among the rocks. But Hawkeye wasn't finished. She pulled up sharply, trading speed for altitude before rolling inverted into another attack run. The second vehicle exploded under her cannon fire, its fuel tank detonating in a fireball that illuminated the entire canyon. Overlord, this is Hawkeye. First convoy is neutralized, but I'm showing another group approaching from the east. My ammunition is critically low. Copy Hawkeye, Dustoff is 5 minutes out. Can you maintain coverage? 5 minutes. She had perhaps 50 rounds of 30mm ammunition remaining and enough fuel for maybe 2 more attack runs before she would be forced to return to base. The mathematics of combat were unforgiving, but she had faced worse odds before. The second convoy was moving more cautiously, having learned from their comrades' fate. 3 vehicles advanced in bounds, using the terrain to mask their movement while maintaining overwatch positions. It was tactically sound, professionally executed, and exactly the kind of coordinated movement that made them dangerous opponents. Hawkeye selected her target, the lead vehicle, as it emerged from cover to cross an exposed section of road. She had enough ammunition for 1 burst, maybe 2 if she was precise. The canyon walls rushed past her wingtips as she lined up the shot, the aircraft systems calculating lead angles and ballistic trajectories, while she focused on the fundamentals of aerial gunnery. The GAU-8 cannon fired its final rounds in a stream of depleted uranium that found its mark with mechanical precision. The vehicle disintegrated under the impact, but its destruction had exhausted her primary armament. She was now orbiting the battlefield with empty guns, reduced to using her presence as a psychological weapon against enemies who would soon realize she could no longer hurt them. Dust off, this is Hawkeye 1-1. Landing zone is cold for now, but I've got limited ability to provide fire support. Recommend maximum speed on approach. Roger Hawkeye. Dust off 7-7 is inbound 2 minutes out. 2 minutes had never seemed so long. The U-60 Black Hawk appeared as a dark speck against the lightning sky, its rotors beating the mountain air into submission as it descended toward the extraction zone. Hawkeye maintained her orbit overhead, her eyes scanning for any signs of enemy activity while simultaneously monitoring her fuel gauges. She had perhaps 10 minutes of flying time remaining before she would be forced to divert to the nearest airfield, regardless of the tactical situation. Neptune 6, Dust-Off 7-7 is on approach. Prepare for immediate extraction. Roger Hawkeye, we're ready for pickup. The helicopter flared to a hover above the rocky landing zone, its crew chiefs already preparing stretchers and medical equipment for the wounded SEALs. The extraction proceeded with mechanical efficiency born from countless training iterations and the urgent knowledge that every second on the ground increased the risk of enemy contact. But the remaining Taliban fighters weren't finished. As the helicopter touched down and the SEALs began loading their casualties aboard, muzzle flashes erupted from the ridgeline to the north. Small arms fire stitched across the landing zone, forcing the medical crew to work under direct enemy observation. Hawkeye watched the tracers reaching toward the vulnerable aircraft and made the only decision possible. She didn't have ammunition, but she had 15,000 pounds of aircraft traveling at 300 knots. The A-10 was built around its cannon, but it was also armored like a flying tank, designed to absorb punishment that would destroy other aircraft. Dust-Off 7-7, continue loading. I'm going to draw their fire. She rolled inverted and dove toward the enemy position, not to attack, but to present herself as a target too tempting to ignore. The Taliban fighters took the bait, shifting their fire from the stationary helicopter to the diving aircraft. Bullets sparked off her armored cockpit and pierced non-critical sections of wing and fuselage, but the A-10 absorbed the damage with characteristic stoicism. Hawkeye 1-1, this is Dust-Off. We're airborne with all personnel. Thanks for the cover. Roger. Dust-Off, get them home safely. The Black Hawk disappeared into the dawn sky, carrying its precious cargo toward the trauma surgeons at Bagram Airfield. The mission was complete, the SEALs were safe, but Hawkeye still had to get herself and her damaged aircraft back to base. The bullet holes in her wings were bleeding hydraulic fluid, and at least one engine was running rough from battle damage. She climbed slowly toward the northwest, nursing the wounded A-10 through the thin mountain air while calculating fuel consumption and emergency landing options. The aircraft was hurt, but still flying, still responding to her inputs with the mechanical reliability that had made it legendary among pilots who flew in harm's way. AWACS Overlord, this is Hawkeye 1-1. Mission complete, one friendly aircraft damaged, returning to base. Roger Hawk, outstanding work out there. You've got emergency equipment standing by at Bagram. The flight back to base gave Hawkeye time to process what had just happened. 12 American warriors were alive because she had chosen to ignore the safe, conventional wisdom about air support in heavily defended terrain. The mission had succeeded through a combination of aggressive tactics, precise weapons employment, and the kind of calculated risks that separated heroes from historians. But more than that, she had proven something to herself and to the doubters who had questioned her capabilities throughout her career. The A-10 wasn't just a weapons system. It was an extension of the pilot's will, a tool for translating courage and skill into tangible results on the battlefield. As Bagram Airfield appeared ahead, its runway lights cutting through the morning mist like a beacon of safety, Hawkeye allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had flown 128 combat sorties, but today's mission would define her legacy. Not because of the tactics she employed or the targets she destroyed, but because of the lives she had saved. The damaged A-10 touched down at Bagram with a gentle thump, its landing gear groaning under the weight of battle damage and nearly empty fuel tanks. Emergency vehicles followed the aircraft as it taxied toward the maintenance hangar, their crews ready to assess the extent of the combat damage and begin repairs. Staff Sergeant Kowalski was waiting at the parking spot, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the bullet holes and hydraulic leaks that marked her aircraft's ordeal. Hawkeye shut down the engines and began the post-flight checklist with automatic precision, though.